Welcome back to KW Property Management Consulting's Community Association Best Practices Monthly Seminar. I'm your host, Tim O'Keefe, a partner with KW Property Management Consulting. We started these webinars in early 2020 to help educate community associations on the best practices to handle the spread of the coronavirus. So I always like to start these webinars with a quick update on the progress made in the US and Florida in our fight against COVID. To date, there have been more than 34 million reported cases in the US with 608,000 deaths. The virus's Delta variant seems to be spreading more quickly in states that have lower vaccination rates. In Florida, there have been almost 22 million doses of the vaccination given out. Slightly more than 47% of Floridians are fully vaccinated. This is up from 44% a month ago. And 55% of Floridians have received at least one dose. Throughout the US, almost 57% of Americans 12 years of age and older are fully vaccinated, which is up from 46% a month ago. The virus's Delta variant is considered to be the current concern, but reports indicate that being fully vaccinated is the best way to protect yourself from any serious impact of the different variants. Last month's webinar, the Miami condo market became the center of all news stories worldwide with the tragic collapse of Champaign Tower South. The KWPMC team has been deeply moved by the tragic events of Champlain Tower South. We wanted to help hundreds of victims that were left homeless with just the shirts on their back. We were able to raise $10,000 from our employees, customers, and concerned people. Our ownership team then matched that donation. So through the efforts of KW, we made a $20,000 donation to help the families affected. We sincerely thank all of you that supported these families and the efforts. Our hearts continue to go out to the victims, their families, and the first responders that have worked tirelessly to address this disaster. This catastrophic event has brought the structural integrity of condos into the limelight for nearly every Floridian that lives in a condominium. Today, we will focus on this topic. How will the tragedy of Champlain Tower South affect the condo market in Florida? Our panel today is the ideal group to discuss this topic. We do have poll questions that you can see on the screen. Please respond to those poll questions and we will address them as we move through this next hour of the webinar. So let's get started by introducing the panelists. First, I'd like to introduce the handsome gentleman with glasses, David Haber. David is the founder of his firm, and he has more than 30 years of experience representing clients in community association law, construction law, complex commercial disputes, real estate, and business law. David, thank you for joining us today from your summer resort in North Carolina.
It's wonderful to be here with you, Tim.
Thank you. Next, we have Ben Messerschmidt. Ben is Director of Epic Forensic and Engineering, focusing in construction defect analysis, condition assessments, and expert representation, ranging from high-rises to large-scale HOAs and marinas. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I'd like to welcome back Bruce Masia. Bruce is a Regional Vice President and partner with KWPMC. Bruce has been on many of these webinars with me. Bruce has a construction background, and his portfolio of properties includes dozens of properties that have gone through the 40-year recertification process. Bruce has been on many of these webinars and is certainly going to continue to provide value. Welcome back, Bruce.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay, enough of all of that. So let's get started. Ben, I'd like to start with you because one of the topics that we're going to focus on is structural and environmental issues to reduce risk in your community. And based on recent events, we found that the 40-year recertification process is becoming more and more prevalent now, and the process is probably going to get tighter and stricter, and we'll hear more from David on that. But can you tell for the audience today, tell us exactly what is the purpose of the 40-year recertification?
Sure. So the purpose of the 40-year recertification is really a twofold process. It is a structural component as well as an electrical component, but their focus is still the same. It's a singular focus, and that's really to preserve life. It is addressing life safety concerns on both of those avenues. So typically what is done is, several evaluations are conducted by an engineer to go ahead and look at those two components and write any sort of reporting that would eventually make it over to the municipality or the authority having jurisdiction on those elements. And it is a baseline or the bare minimum, so to speak, because it is just focusing on the life safety aspect of things. It does not take into account other operational issues that may come into play on some of these complex, larger condominium structures.
And David, can you tell us what counties require the certification process and how do you think that's going to change now?
Right now, the only counties that require a 40-year certification are Miami-Dade and Broward counties. And that was in response to the 1975 collapse of an FBI building. I believe it's going to change and become a statewide requirement. And I believe it's going to be much less than 40 years. I'm expecting it'll be somewhere in the 10 to 20 year range with a requirement that it be checked every 5 years thereafter.
And I know a lot of people from throughout the state are listening to this, and so the concept of 40-year recertification might be relatively new for people on the west coast of Florida or in Tampa and Orlando markets. So this is something that we're very familiar with in South Florida, although it does not impact Palm Beach County, but it sounds like Palm Beach County, from what I'm hearing, is going to move pretty quickly to try to adopt something.
Yeah, and one of the biggest issues in the certification process, and I'll let Ben talk more about this, and Bruce and I and Ben and you all know about this. It was about the corrosive salt air environment and its impact on concrete with rebar inside. And it's like the as one expert has said to me, it's like your structure is your bones and your skeleton, but your waterproofing is your skin. And if you don't have waterproofing, your bones are going to be problematic. And in reality, the biggest problem that I see with this, and I really want Ben to talk about it, is developers put waterproofing on, and or condo associations, when they're re-waterproofing, it lasts 7 years. And they're putting on a cheap product that, unfortunately, because of the overburden, and the overburden is your tile, it's your decorative stone, it's your planter filled with beautiful trees and dirt and rocks and lighting. All of that stuff has to come out when you do waterproofing. So a waterproofing job where the waterproofing is really like $250,000 or $500,000 becomes $1.5 million or $2 million job because of the overburden. And I think one of the other things that needs to change is how we look at waterproofing in the future, and potentially a change to the code, which I'd like Ben to talk about, with a 15 to 20 year minimum requirement for waterproofing.
And Ben, so can you take us back a little bit? So David just put a lot of stuff out there. And so talk about just the construction of a building and then what breaks down over time, because everybody understands concrete or the exterior, but like what goes in the building to hold that building together? There's post-tension cables. We heard rebar. Can you educate the over 100 people we've got online right now as far as what the building is made up of and how it breaks down from over time with salt air and rain and sun and et cetera?
Absolutely. So there's plenty to cover with what David said and with what you just said, Tim. So I'll do my best. So just from a structure, let's just talk about a typical condominium structure. Let's arbitrarily call it about 20 stories tall. The most common component you're going to have on there is going to be concrete. The second is going to be steel. These are mainly concrete and steel components, and you're going to have those mainly located within your slabs, your piles, your columns, your beams. And Tim, you correctly stated, I mean, for the newer construction buildings, you do have post-tensioning. Without getting too complex into what post-tensioning is, it essentially is a structural design for your slabs that allows you to go ahead and build a thinner slab, so to speak. So on newer condominiums, you get out on your balcony, you look down, and it's probably less than 12 inches thick. You probably have a post-tension slab system. And it works kind of like a Chinese finger trap, if you want to think about it like that. So you got loose noodles basically throughout the slab, which are going to be your post-tensioning strands. But after the slab is cast, it is pull taut, and it gets that strength pulling from either end. So that Chinese finger trap is really what I'm talking about there. But you're working your way up just from the structure standpoint of things. So correctly, as David stated, I mean, those are your bones. I mean, that is the true structure. If you don't put anything else in there, that's still going to stand. Then you have your additional components from an enclosure standpoint of things. What's protecting the inside from the outside? You have your fenestrations. So your openings, your glass and glazing, your windows, sliding glass doors, anything like that. And moving up to the top on the roof, you have a roof membrane that is sheltering you. That is the umbrella. you have a similar sort of design, but it's typically on a pool deck or amenities level that's above grade, it will be a split slab construction, which is very common. And this is getting more into what David was talking about. So a split slab construction essentially means you have a flat structural slab, which most structural slabs are flat. And in order to go ahead and achieve a slope to move any water that lands on the pool deck or on the amenities level, it needs to have slope. That slope is achieved by a topping slab. So it's not very much structural, more than a sloping material. But in between both levels, so on the top of that structural slab, that's where the waterproofing is. And during new construction, the type of waterproofing you select doesn't sell more units. Plain and simple. It is not a sexy material to go ahead and put in a marketing brochure. I do a lot
You
of
mean nobody
testifying.
ever buys a condo and they say, what kind of waterproofing was used on this building before I buy into it?
Yeah, I don't think anybody's asked that question, unfortunately. And I mean, maybe if I was in the condo market, I might ask that question, but I'm not in the condo market anytime soon. But so you have that waterproofing there. So typically it's an economical waterproofing that gets the job done. And on the lowest end of things, correctly as David stated, I mean, you're talking less than 10 years. And then you build up, you have a topping slab, and then you have whatever material on top, be it travertine,
What happens
be it
every
pavers.
7 years when you're supposed to paint, or you're supposed to do maybe some concrete restoration and you don't, and waterproofing and you don't, you just paint? What starts to happen to the building?
I mean, it's starting to become lipstick on a pig. It still is a pig at the end of the day. So, I mean, the paint can only do so much. Now, if you are regular with your maintenance, let's say just from the structure, that should take care of some hairline cracks and things like that. But that's not going to stop items that inherently have a short lifespan. Those are still going to age.
I think another way to look at it is people, board members, you need to understand your building talks to you. It talks
Absolutely.
to you. It talks to you through the leaks that come into the garage, that somebody decides to put a gutter to try to move the water over. But if you're not fixing the source of the leak, or you have a column that starts rusting and you send the building engineer, who by the way is not an engineer, he's a building maintenance person, and you send him in there and say, paint that. That's not resolving the problem. But your building always speaks to you, whether it's cracks in the balcony slabs, cracks in the stucco on the shear walls, whether it's columns in the garage, and all of us understand that. It speaks to you in the way it is responding to the elements. And the number one thing that you need to take away from today is that you have to do preventative maintenance throughout the life of the building to avoid the huge assessments later.
And one more piggyback actually on top of that. I mean, very correctly stated, David. I mean, you have cracks that are going to be telling you what's going on, and the locations and their orientation is going to be very telling. But one thing that I think is inherently wrong with the overall condo system, and just looking at a very big picture, is that it's always sold as, oh, this is a low maintenance option. Forget mowing your lawn at your single family home. Come over and live in this high-rise condo. You don't have to worry about maintenance. But the reality of it is if you have 300 residential units within that condo, it should really be evaluated as you have 300 single family homes just in one location. And that level of maintenance really shouldn't change.
And Bruce, you have to deal with, from a practical standpoint, how do you bring this together, with the board, with the ownership of a community, and from management standpoint to ensure that the communities are funding these maintenance projects properly, timely, and getting the work done?
There was a couple of things that was said that David and Ben said. And one of the biggest things that I want to bring out is what we tend to find is that boards shy away from these things. These are big issues, folks. These are things that you need to address. I'm going to use the analogy. If you're not feeling well, you go to the doctor. You have to go to the doctor because you want to fix it. It's the same thing with buildings. David kind of did it articulately in saying that it's speaking to you. And when your building is telling you things that they need to be fixed, it's like going to a doctor. You bring the engineer who's the doctor, and he tells you what you need to do. And then you go to the therapist, and who is the restorers and all those other vendors that are out there. Those are the different therapists that are there. But this is where management comes in to try to enlighten a board not to shy away from these things. So when we talk about doing preventative maintenance, reserve studies, and all these different things that we have, these are the tools that we have to be able to do these things. These are the things that we shouldn't push off to the side, because the number one complaint in most condominium buildings, and let's be truthful with each other, it costs money. And we all know that if we lived in a private house, you would fix the roof. If the roof is bad, if there is a structural problem, you would fix it. Now we're just together in maybe 60, 100, 400 units that we're all sharing in this fix. And I don't think anyone would shy away from that fix. So from a management perspective, we're there to try to facilitate, to bring this in. We're there to bring the Bens of the world. We're there to bring the David Habers of the world together. We formulate our team so that we could best move forward with a project. So Ben moving in, this is what your problem's in, this is what it's going to take. We get those contracts to David. He really looks them over. He gives us good sound advice so that we move forward and making sure these projects become successful. But those things have to happen. Those hard decisions of spending money fall upon boards that have to make those decisions. Now, remember, board members are residents also. They pay the same amount of maintenance or the same amount, that nasty word of special assessment. We don't like to use those things, but they pay the same amount as everyone in the building. So that's what management does, facilitates the team. Let's look at what we've got, and let's make sure that we move forward of fixing those issues that make us a very sound, stable environment that we live in and that we won't have issues in.
So this is a very, let me just say something quickly here, David, just so you guys understand something as far as the audience goes today. One of the poll questions that we asked was whether the Champlain Tower South tragedy has changed their view of building safety. And 73% of the respondents have said yes, 27% have said no. But also, as far as those that are on this webinar today, 40% of the people on the call today are in buildings that are over 40 years old. And 21% are between 31 to 40 years old. 11% are 21 to 30 years old. So David, back to one of the things you said early on, which is as the laws start to change, we could expect these younger buildings to be forced into some level of compliance when it comes to maintenance.
Yeah, I want to try to address something that Bruce talked about, as well as try to help answer a couple of these questions that have come in. The politics of condominium living. The politics of condominium living prior to the tragedy at Champlain Towers was, if a board passed a special assessment or considered passing a huge special assessment to fix items that were critical because they're on an engineering report, or they're spalling that you can see, or waterproofing that is failing, owners have been up in arms in the past. It's too much money. And remember, the problem with a concrete restoration or stucco restoration job is, and Ben will talk about this later, you have to keep going until you get good stucco or you get good concrete and good rebar. So what you think may be $1 million job could be a $4 million job, which is why you have an excellent management company that can bring your team together, and can bring your team not only together, but do the destructive testing up front. Spend the money early on the inspections and the destructive testing so that you get a better idea of what your total project will end up at. And if you spend $200,000 in the front, you may realize that your job is not $1 million, but it's $4 million. Now, in the past, if a board was going to pass a special assessment for something other than more beautiful lounge chairs, the elevator cabs looking nice, and the marble beautiful floor, and the wallpaper and the carpeting in the hallways, the owners not only would potentially throw them off the board and bring in a new board that wouldn't do that. But they would also slander them and defame them. And it was a miserable experience. I think the game has changed and we're at a new dawn. We're at a new day where people now recognize that the life safety issues, the non-sexy waterproofing and concrete restoration and the stucco maintenance and doing the paint job on time, not pushing it an extra 3 or 4 years down the road. If it should be done every 8 years, don't wait till 12 years. So I think that's the new reality that boards are going to be dealing with. One of the questions was, what can unit owners do if the board doesn't communicate with the owners? I think when you have a good management company like KW, you're going to get updates. They're going to be on the website. They're going to be in written communications. And I always tell the boards, the number one issue to avoid a revolt within your association is transparency. You must have transparency about this process, and you must include your professionals. You must have professionals. You cannot do this alone. And your management team knows who the right professionals are, and it's not always the cheapest. You should be getting the best, not the cheapest. Don't be penny wise and pound foolish. And in that regard, waiver of reserves is a bad idea, and I believe that the legislature is going to make it much harder to waive reserves on a continual basis. And I would argue, and will seek to push legislation that makes life safety reserves a requirement and to be separated from money you may spend on fixing your lobby, which a lot of people have taken the reserves and rated the reserves to do things that, of course, increase market value. But you're also going to find, and the managers on this call are going to know, purchase and sale of units is going to change. People used to look at the lobby, look at the pool, and they fell in love with the view, and boom, they bought the unit. And now you're going to find brokers calling Bruce's managers and saying, do you have any engineering reports? Can you tell me what the financial condition of this association is? Have you been waiving reserves? So Bruce's teams are going to have to come up with a methodology to either provide this information to the owners so that they can disseminate it, or have it available to prospective purchasers. And that'll be a decision that KW makes internally.
David, can I just add something to that also?
Sure.
Not only is it going to be for resales, but in my opinion, and which is what I hear from some people within the industry, that banks are going to be looking at this for lending, and so they're not going to be so quick to lend you the money unless they hire someone like a Ben that's out there. So this is all going to be revolutionary in who's looking at it, how they look at it, what kind of reports. I think that everyone is trying to get their arms around this. Different cities, counties, they're all reacting a little differently. Our friends in Tallahassee, I believe, are going to release things very quickly. This is not going to lag. This is hot. This is, this is where everyone wants to, I hate to say this, jump on the bandwagon, but this is a good bandwagon to jump on. This is
Bruce,
a good thing to bring us
Absolutely.
together.
I would bring another point up. Not only are lenders going to require information about a building, but insurance carriers for the association are going to say, show me your reserve study, show me your reserves, and show me what your engineering report is, because we may not insure your building if we don't find that you're working on what the engineering report says.
And
I
don't
completely
wanna-
agree.
I'm sorry, Ben.
Sorry,
let
Bruce.
me just add one quick thing, and it's 30 seconds. Not only, and you brought up the insurance, I think, David, and what I've heard from the insurance professional, that more of the insurance companies are going to remove themselves from older buildings. And what they're going to do is saying, I'm not going to show anything that's greater than 20 years old. So the market is going to close here, and it's going to cost more. It's going to cost the older buildings more. I'm getting boards aware. If you're a board member, get ready. Not only have we had increases there, but this is going to be a major play. And Ben, thank you. I'm sorry I cut you off there. Let me get some things in there. Go ahead.
No, that's great. I mean, this has been very good dialogue, and honestly, things that I've been thinking about just ever since this whole collapse. I mean, it is truly a ripple effect that is hitting every supporting component to condominium life, plain and simple.
And
so,
and
I mean, even with
David,
that,
let
the
me ask
one
this.
thing I do
How
want
is
to.
the fiduciary responsibility of the, because that's number one responsibility of boards. Everyone always says it's a fiduciary responsibility. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had just in the last year with boards that say, I can't afford to do that because, Mrs. Jones is a widower and she's on a fixed income. And if we have this special assessment, she can't afford it. So we really can't do that because she's going to have to move out. And she's been here 40 years. It's not fair to her. And there's boards that take a much more aggressive approach that say, look, everybody that lives here has to be able to afford the special assessment because we can't hold ourselves back or see the deterioration of our building because at some point you reach a point 40 years down the road where you have to do it. And now it may be at 20 years you have to do it, or 15 years you have to do it. And so you have to have the money available. I'm a big proponent of reserves should be mandatory. I don't think it's fair to put off having reserves. If I lived in a building the first 15 years and I didn't need a new generator, didn't need a new roof, didn't need new windows, that's great, but I should still contribute to that cost every single day I live there, and the building gives me the enjoyment that I expect to get from the building.
so first, I want to just follow up on something that Bruce and Ben said, and that is, I think all buildings right now should not only get a forensic engineer to do a building assessment like Ben's company does, and like KW, according to what I just heard prior to this meeting, this webinar, all KW buildings are getting building assessments, and I commend KW for that tremendous decision because it's important. Lenders are going to be much more wary of lending for special assessments as well. So now let's talk about the ripple effect that Ben talked about, and I will get to your question, Tim. The ripple effect is going to be this terrible tragedy is going to have the kind of impact on the lending and insurance industry that Hurricane Andrew had in terms of the Florida building code, as well as the insurance and lending industry. Windstorm, as everybody on this call knows, is the most expensive item because everybody for the last 20, 30 years has been focused on hurricanes. And there have been many of them all up and down the Florida coastline, East Coast, West Coast, the Keys, North, South. And of course, they have the special insurance for those who can't get insurance by the state, and it is very expensive. I see the same thing happening with respect to older buildings trying to get insurance. And I see ultimately the Florida legislature having to pass some kind of thing to create an insurance company to fund the insurance for these older buildings. In regards to loans, I see the SBA having to come in and create a loan program to give 10 and 15-year loans to these older buildings, because remember, a lot of the older buildings are filled with people on fixed income, and you can't have half the building default and get foreclosed, and then the other half of the building ends up having to pay for it. And now you have a building that goes bankrupt. So the legislature is going to have to think about whatever changes they're making, what's going to be the impact. So going to the issue of reserves, I've likened it in newspaper articles I've been quoted in an op-ed piece I'm doing for the New York Times, that it's like everybody going to a restaurant for 25 years and eating, walking out of the restaurant, and in year 26, a guy walks in and they hand him a bill for the first 25 years. And he says, but I didn't even eat anything yet. And it is unfair. And that's why I think when it comes to things like life safety, which are the structural components of your building, the roof, as well as the glazing system, as well as the waterproofing, we're going to get to a point where they're not going to allow a waiver of reserves. And I think that's going to be the answer. because otherwise you leave someone, and again, it's not going to be 40 years anymore. It's going to be 10, 20, 25. That's where it's going to fall. And wherever it falls, someone's going to get a tab, and they're not going to like that tab. And in many cases, they're not going to be able to afford that tab. So I think we need to change the way we look at maintaining our building. And as Ben said, condominium living is going to cost more now. There's no way, given the insurance impacts, the banking impacts, the maintenance impacts, the reserve impacts, that condo living is going to be the same. And to Tim's point, really it's unfair if you have two buildings right next door to one another, and they're both 30 years old, and one building has $700 a month in maintenance, and the other one has $1,200 because they fully reserve. Everybody moves into the $700 building because it's cheaper. But they don't realize that down the road, if they're going to stay in that building, they're going to have a $30,000 special assessment. So we really need people to have apples to apples.
And that's a great point, David, because this incident is going to make buyers smarter when they start buying, and the realtors are going to have more responsibility to ask the right questions and do more due diligence for the buyers, because that's going to be important. So, Ben, let me come back to you. Let me just finish off with the 40-year recertification, because that's what we have today.
It should be right there, or check the car.
Should a building?
But I think it's in my pocket. It went into.
When should a building start the 40-year recertification process? I mean, and when should it be finished? So if you work backward, if you say by year 40 it should be finished, when do you need to start?
My recommendation is always starting, I mean, at least you're talking anything past 35 years, and really start thinking about it. So ideally between 35 and 37 years is where you want to get geared up. The last thing you want to be is behind the 8 ball in this entire process, because there's already stipulated timeframes that certain issues need to be addressed in. I mean, ranging from 150 days to 180 days. Either way, and quite frankly, some of the work that's required can't get done in that time period. And even just think about today's climate. I mean, the labor market and the construction market of materials. The lead times on starting anything right now is insane. So doing it at your own pace and being able to go ahead and have the time to do those deep dives, as a forensic engineer, you can get a holistic answer as to where am I? So using the doctor analogy that Bruce mentioned was, okay, you do your physical, you run your blood work. Where are we? Some of your levels are high. That means we need to go ahead and focus more on this approach. So your waterproofing is gone, let's focus there. Or your roof is gone, let's focus there. It should be also grouped in together with not just the items that are a straight line life safety issue, because there's also going to be purchasing power when you go ahead and perform some of these large scale projects. Think about a facade project, which is mainly going to be addressing your structure. You have those fenestrations that I mentioned. You have the roof as well. There's a lot of ancillary items that could really be beneficial to any association to take advantage of, given the fact of you have the high mobilization cost by any contractor that would be there just to set foot on the property. So those should be taken advantage of and staying within your time frame. Not the authority having jurisdiction is crucial to get those steps done and accomplished well.
I would argue.
Can I talk about
Sure.
a little bit about what Ben just said, especially we're in budget season, and I just want to mention that. There is no law that says you can't start early. There is no law that says what David was talking about if your reserve funding is low. This is the opportunity where you can look at those things, start to put the money away that you need to put away, and also start on work early. There is no law that says you've got to wait to that 40-year. Like Ben was saying, start doing things in phases. So by the time you get to the 40-year, we're hoping, if you follow the plan for the engineer, then maybe all you're doing is touch-up work. Maybe you're seeing these things. But again, if you've got a good engineer, you've got a good management company and good direction, you could definitely accomplish this instead of waiting to the very end and rushing. Because David, correct me if I'm wrong, there is no going to be any more missing these dates with these inspectors anymore. They are going to be on you like a fly now. So, you could say these days where they used to say, okay, it's okay if you hire an engineer, we'll let you slide. The magistrates are going to get plenty of view because people are putting this off, and they're not going to go away from fining at anyone. These magistrates are going to be very heavy on the fines into making sure this gets done, and they're not going to forgive them. They're not going to go through that.
I'll go one further. In terms of Ben's comment about 35 to 37 years on a 40, I think you start at year 35 for the following reason. Your engineers come in, your MEP, your fire, and your structural. They view the building, they do the inspections, they may or may not do destructive testing. They've got to write a report. That takes a month or two.
Mhm.
Then they forward the report to the board. Then the board has to let the owners know. Then you have to get with your management company and you have to formulate a plan. Then they may have to do more destructive testing. That takes time. Then the engineer has to come up with with specifications on how the fix is to be performed, because a building permit cannot be pulled without specifications. Then you have to take those specifications, send them out to bid, get 3 qualified bidders, which KW will help you find, 3 reputable contracting companies, and then you have to bid it. That takes 60 days. Then when that comes back, the lawyer has to negotiate the contract with the contracting company. And then you've got to get scheduled with the contractor who has 40 other jobs because everybody else is doing a certification. So now you probably have gone through a year of process. Some of these projects take 2 and 3 years. It's not like you snap your fingers and it's done. Ben can tell you that when you're doing a stucco and concrete restoration project, it can take 2.5, 3 years, even if it's staged, even if you put people on 5-6 days a week. So you have to understand that unless you start at least 4 years before, you're not going to be ready by year 40 or year 20 or 25 or whatever it's going to be. And Bruce is 100% correct. These building inspectors are not going to take the risk anymore of someone dying. And this is even though we don't even know what the cause or causes of the Champlain Towers collapse was. Everybody's assuming that the lack of preventative maintenance and the lack of doing the work timely had some impact. We don't know because the forensic engineers haven't yet said. But if you look at any of those pictures, it's very clear that building was not being maintained properly. And the building officials are not only going to fine, as Bruce said, and they're not going to be small fines either. They're going to throw you out of your building at some point. That's what they're going to do to you.
And one thing to even piggyback on that, I mean, I know we're placing a lot of emphasis on this 40-year recertification process, but I do want to clearly highlight that that is the bare minimum, and it's focusing on life safety only. Imagine if you're only to take care of yourself once every 40 years. If you're only going to brush your teeth once every 40 years, imagine how many teeth you'd have left. This is an ongoing process that needs to be done at regular intervals that are recommended by your forensic engineer and by your professionals that are surrounding the association.
Ben, when you start your process, are you given a list? Do different counties have a list of things that need to be accomplished in your forensic engineering inspections?
Not necessarily well, for the 40-year, they do give the guidelines. So thanks for clarifying that. 40-year does give the guideline, and it really all starts with the county. Now, there are some municipalities that have gone above and beyond. I mean, you think about like City of Aventura, they have their own. I know like right now, the City of Boca is going ahead and they're putting forth some legislation with respect to inspections. So it's really taken a comprehensive approach. The municipality won't give it to you. They will make it available, just like they make everything else available. Like if you wanted to pay your water bill, that's it. It's an available resource. But having a qualified professional going ahead and then does this and has accomplished these things and also done the repairs before and focusing on a forensic standpoint of things as opposed to a traditional design standpoint of things and giving that holistic approach, those will be a seamless process that the association and management company and everyone there can really just rely upon those qualified professionals to do their jobs.
And Ben, when the association is hiring an engineer to do this work, David brought up there's an MEP engineer, you have MEP, fire, and structural. Is that a single engineer, or do you need multiple engineers that have specialists that are specialists in those areas?
Oh, it'll be multiple engineers. Absolutely. I mean, because think about it, you for this physical, we're calling it, right? So even going above and beyond the 40-year research, you have a lot of different components on that property. Think about it as a small hamlet placed on one plot of land. So within there, you have architectural components, structural components, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire, the whole nine, ADA. So those should be comprehensively looked at to really get a gauge of where you are. And it's also going to go ahead and set a priority level to what needs to be done and what's recommended from project-wise. So you can have a qualified engineer go ahead and set that as a first stroke and to present that in front of the association as a whole. And even outline, okay, well, of project one that has 5 different items, 2 of those components fall directly in line with the 40-year recertification process. So that's advantageous to go ahead and take care of. So again, maximizing that big Band-Aid that is going to be pulled off at that point in time.
So, and then Ben, what is the most common mistake you think that board members make when they get the engineering report, comes back and they look at it, and like, I don't know if they understand it or not. Some do, some have engineering backgrounds, but what's the common mistake that you often see in follow-up conversations with board members?
They do nothing. I mean, that's by far the worst thing that can happen in the process. And I understand that engineers aren't the most warm personalities, and hopefully I could try to sway some people from that stereotype on this call, but having a very direct and open conversation with your engineer is going to be crucial, because there are going to be some very technical terms that are used in technical concepts, but those should be effectively communicated. I mean, we're all people at the end of the day, and if you don't understand what I'm saying, it doesn't matter how good of an engineer I am. It's not going to get anything done.
I make a recommendation, especially to board members that are out there. He just said something very key. When you're sitting at the table with the engineer, and there's these big words and these gobbledygook things that are going out there, stop them. Say, please, explain this in layman terms for me. Make it easy. Break it down for me so that I understand this, because when you walk away from that table, you need to understand what's going on. You need to understand the ramifications there. So same thing with the lawyer. You know, we're stressing as a company from a KW standpoint that no matter how old your building is, no matter how old, you need to go get that engineer to, you know, really give your building a once over. No matter if it's 40 years, somebody wrote in the chat there, Tim, maybe that answers the question. Doesn't matter if your building's 15 years. I'm repeating something that we're saying. Just get the report, spend the extra $1, go ahead, get that report. But when you go ahead and you start trying to understand it, just break it down. Someone like Ben is very capable. Just put it into layman terms.
Another thing here is, remember this, spend $1 now and save 100 later. You need a team. You need a good management company. You need a good lawyer. You need good engineers. You need a good accountant. And you need a good reserve study specialist. Someone asked the question in the chat, is my concept of not waiving reserves for life safety inconsistent with pooled reserves? My answer is no, because you can do straight line reserves for life safety, and you can put them in a separate pool just for life safety and not allow them to be in the other pool for other items. So that answers that question. And, you know, everyone needs to understand that all of this is a comprehensive approach. You can't do it with only an engineer or only a lawyer or only a management company. You need a team, and KW knows who to put on the team. And if you don't have the right team, you're not going to get the right result. You're just not. And the other thing I wanted to say is the board can get protection and cover, because Tim had asked me this earlier about, you know, board service and fiduciary duty. So I didn't really answer it then. I'm going to answer it now. The law gives, because everybody is saying, I mean, let's be honest, what's everybody saying? Why do I want to be on a board of directors? that's the honest question. And here's the honest answer. Because if you don't do it and protect your own life safety and your own building and your own value, who do you want to leave it to? If you have a $500,000 investment or $1 million investment, or even a $200,000 investment, who do you want to leave it to? And the answer is, I'd rather have it in my hands than someone else's. Now, the law is that so long as you exercise your reasonable business judgment, you are protected and immune from suit. But the question becomes, at what point is your business judgment no longer reasonable? My answer to that is when you're not listening to your engineer, your management company, and your lawyer who are telling you, you better pass this special assessment and you better start on this work. And if your board won't do that, and you're on the board, and every engineer, lawyer, and management company has already told you you need to do it, then that's when you resign from the board to avoid the liability. But you have liability if you follow the advice of your experts. The other thing I would tell you is, in order to get your owners on board on the same ship that you're sailing on, let your experts help in the communication. Does it cost $1,000 to have your lawyer and your engineer work on the letter? Yeah, but that may save you all of the aggravation and months of fighting with unit owners who don't want to hear it from you. Let your management company, let your lawyer, let your engineer provide the communication. Let them come to the meeting. Does it cost money? Yes, but in the long run, it benefits you and it'll help you get done what you need to get done.
So David,
I
let me
absolutely agree
let me
with
get
that.
your perspective on this. So based on the poll questions, we've had 70% of the answers to this question were yes. Have you properly maintained the structure of your building? 70% said yes. But the previous question to that was, do you have adequate reserves to invest in the structural improvements for your condo? 51% said no. So those are going in opposite directions to me. So do you really believe that the 70% who said yes really understand what needs to get done structurally?
No, I don't
Likely
believe
not.
so. I don't believe so because I don't really think that reserve studies up till now have really taken into account the structure. They take into account how often you need to change the roof membrane, the generator, maybe even the pool
AC,
equipment,
AC,
the
all those,
AC,
yeah.
the riser pipes. How often do you need to change the mechanical or the elevator? But nobody is focused on how often do we have to deal with the slabs or the parking garage columns or the entire shear wall itself? Because reserve studies have not really been done by engineers up till now. I have to say that they've been done by reserve study specialists. And I think, by the way, I'm going to now go back to what I think the legislature needs to do is when they have these certifications and they have these reports, they should be done by professional engineers with no less than 10 years experience in the field, not someone who just came out of school 2 or 3 years ago. We need specialists. We need people who understand forensic engineering and remediation and reserve studies. And I don't think the reserve studies that are coming out or have been coming out really have taken into account the issue of structure. And Bruce and the other two of you, tell me if you disagree with that.
I don't disagree. Ben?
Yeah, I don't disagree either. But I mean, that's a very good point. I mean, we perform even reserve studies, okay? But we use our engineering focus as a driving force. And who we essentially compete against are going to be CPAs, plain and simple. And that's at a best case. Those CPAs are really just running analyses, and their knowledge is solely based upon the last building they reviewed and whatever their bank of other projects were. It doesn't take that holistic and root cause approach that individuals like myself would go ahead and take. And you're 100% correct. It only looks at replacement costs of anything that I think is over $10,000. But structure is not part of that equation, unfortunately.
And someone asked the question or made the comment that concrete restoration doesn't meet the 4-part National Reserve Study Standards test. Well, you know what? Then the National Reserve Study Standards test needs to change, because the reality is you have to reserve for concrete restoration and balcony restoration. And let me just say one other thing about balconies. balconies are exposed to the wind and the air and the sea, right on the ocean, right on the bay. They do suffer deterioration. So one of the things I recommend to all associations, pass a waterproofing spec for all balconies. When people are changing the tile, make sure there's a consistent engineering approved, sealed waterproofing spec for balcony slabs, so that when they put on the new tile, that balcony is protected and that it integrates with the window wall system, i.e. the sliding glass doors, so that the water doesn't end up getting into the slab on the other side. So that's something that KW and Ben's company can help you work on. And that's an easy one. Every building should have a consistent balcony waterproofing spec. And that has to be performed by a professional engineer.
Hey, David, I just want to add something here, because some people really need to understand the environment that we're all in right now. The days of having 5 or 6 engineers that you have, especially the better ones like Epic that's out there, those days are over of having 5 or 6 choices. It's extremely hard right now to go ahead and get qualified people in general. So if you can, and I'm seeing this, if you can get 1 or 2 that are qualified, willing to come to your property, has the manpower, has the capacity to do this, I would not be waiting. And David said something very, very important. This should not, everyone is money conscientious, I get it. But if it sounds reasonable and you kind of have something, I know that the statute says 3, you're going to do your best to get 3, but I see some people saying, it's harder and harder and harder. This is where the relationships are come from. This is where the management companies, if you're with a good one, look, we have a great relationship with Epic, and we find them to really meet the criteria. There are very few out there that meet the criteria. You're going to have plenty of people coming in from different states and saying, I could do this, I could do that. Do your diligence on your team. Management companies are not lawyers. We're not engineers. We're facilitators. I could tell you what I think, but it's not me. I'm going to help you, or your manager is going to help you get your team together. So we go to Ben and we go to David and say, what do you think? So there was a couple of questions that I think that we kind of answered through what I'm saying to you at this point.
I want to follow up on what Bruce just said, but I'm going to say it differently. Qualified management companies like KW have buying power. What do I mean by buying power? I mean, in this high stress, paranoid environment where engineers, qualified engineers, are at a premium, and there are not enough. I answered the question in the chat. There are not enough. Who's going to be able to get an engineer out to your building? If you are not managed by a management company and you are single managed by a manager, the chances of your manager getting a qualified engineer out to your property is probably less than 10%, unless it's his cousin or his brother. When you have a company like KW and Bruce picks up the phone and calls Ben and says, I need you to do this, knowing the relationship between the engineering company and the management company, and I don't mean a monetary arrangement, I mean a trust relationship where KW is getting quality service providers and vendors, whether it's law firms, engineers, accountants. They have the buying power to say, hey, we represent 50 associations that are utilizing your services. I need you out there now. They got a real problem. Then the chances of you getting their attention is probably higher than 90%. And that's why,
David, that's a really good point, because I would hate to be a self-managed property right now and calling an engineering firm and saying, I need you guys to come out here. There's so many there's relationships that exist between management companies and the vendors that know that they've got steady work coming, and they will get to those properties eventually. But in the last 4 years, we've taken on almost 30 self-managed buildings for the very reason that it just becomes more work on the board, and it's never cheaper to be self-managed, because you wait 40 years and have to spend $30 million to fix something. If you did it right for the first 30 years, you'd never have to spend that kind of money. So that's another, just another angle that people need to consider.
There's a question that was asked, because I'm really monitoring the questions a lot. And it's a Ben, I said it's a Ben question. How do you define structural integrity?
Structural integrity. Okay, that's a great one. So structural integrity is really going to be focused on how well your structure holds. I mean, it is a direct structural component. Now, that means that it's going to be holding load. It is currently holding load and is anticipated to be holding load, whether that be your slabs, whether that be your columns, whether that be your footings, whether that be your balconies. Those are holding load. So structural integrity can be looked at on a macro scale, and it can also be looked on a micro scale. You have structural integrity of even a balcony railing system that needs to meet a 200-pound point load. If that doesn't, that does not meet the structural integrity of that system. So that is really the focus. It is a broad answer, don't get me wrong, and I understand that, but it is solely focusing on how much load can it withstand, and that's the main focus.
And David, we're coming up on top of the hour, so I want to be respectful of time. We only have about 3 or 4 minutes left, and I got a dozen questions before we even started today, and we're not going to get to all of those. So maybe our next, if y'all would be amenable to it, we can come back and do this again next month, because I think there's a lot of topics we need to cover. But I do want you to cover one thing, David, that you started into and then backed away a little bit, which is insurance. So one of the questions I had was, what exposure does a board have if they disregard the engineer's report that comes back? And how will D&O change based on board's decision-making going forward?
Well, as I said, all insurances are going to get more expensive. I would recommend that you get with your management company like KW and get with your insurance broker, and maybe even have KW retain for you an insurance analyst that's not your broker, who merely for $5,000 analyzes all of your insurances and determines whether you have the adequate insurance, the right type of insurance. And I'll give you an example. There was an insurance that was available to people that after the SARS epidemic, they started excluding viruses and other, types of pandemics, if you will. But they provided a separate policy if you wanted to pay for it. And in the past, it wasn't very expensive. Think about all the hotels and restaurants and businesses that didn't buy that policy and then got stuck with a closed hotel, and so policies are going to change, and there will probably even be exclusions coming in down the road on D&O that if you don't follow the professional's advice, that may be considered willful, wanton, intentional conduct, because those things are not part of your exemption from liability. If you willfully ignore that report, you will be liable. You have to follow the report, which is why I said, if your board's not going to do it and you're the sole member screaming, do it, do it, do it, get off the board.
And also talk to your attorney, talk to your association attorney, get support from your association attorney. And
your management company and your engineer. And someone asked a question, what if the board doesn't want to do a reserve study? Notify the Division of Condominiums, file a complaint. If people aren't doing what's required of them, and one of the things that has been problematic in the past is the division doesn't have enough people, it doesn't have enough resources, and I think it just came out in the newspapers that the government took all that condo money from all of those fees every year and put it into the general fund of the state. That's not going to happen anymore either. There's going to be more local, county, and statewide enforcement mechanisms. So utilize them. Utilize them.
David, one last thing I want you to touch on, and we'll wrap things up. We were talking about this before we opened up the webinar. Talk about the importance of the email address that board members use.
So I raised this prior to us starting the webinar, and I've raised this in a number of other webinars. There's going to be a grand jury criminal investigation in Miami-Dade County regarding the Surfside tragedy. And they may be looking to indict people for criminal negligence, okay? When over 90 or 100 people die in an incident, and I don't know whether it was avoidable or not, but they're going to be looking into that issue. They are going to subpoena the last 15 years of board members' emails. And presumably in a building that was not well maintained, they also probably didn't have association email addresses. For your own protection as a board member and for the management company's protection, all email addresses of all association business should be on an association email account where it is saved and protected. Why? Because sometimes people delete their old emails. And when you do that, you may be deleting the thing that protects you, where you wrote, yes, go ahead and do that. You need to have that protection and you need to have that saved. And that's why the management companies, the good ones like KW, have an association email account for every board member, and it gets saved. And it should be saved for the period of time that the federal government says you have to save records for your tax return, which I think is 8 years minimum.
David,
And
I
I
want
think,
to
go
want to
ahead.
back you up on something, David. It's highly recommended, especially KW recommends it. Do not mix it with your personal mail. And that's what we want to make sure that you keep your business separate and so forth. It's a good practice. I'm sorry I cut you off there. Let me let you finish there.
No, I mean, listen, from a liability standpoint, and I want to go back to the D&O insurance. You should have D&O insurance. You should have boiler and machinery. You should have general liability, CGL, property insurance. However, I recommend every association have an umbrella policy over the top. Okay? Do not just go with $2 million of D&O insurance. Have 10, 20, $30 million of D&O insurance to protect you. And it also protects on the casualty and the boiler machinery. It's an umbrella over the top. Get with your management company, get with your insurance broker. Yes, it is going to be more expensive going forward, but it is part of your fiduciary duty to have the proper insurance. Champlain Towers South had $47 million of insurance, only $2 million of D&O, only $30 million for the property. They should have had probably over $100 million on the property alone, and they had no umbrella. Not the way you want to run an association. I wanted to say one other thing. The question was asked, how do we reach Bruce, you, and Ben? So I'm going to start off. You can reach me at 305-379-2400. That's 305-379-2400. And you can reach me at my email address at dhaber, that's Haber, D as in David, at haber.law.
I will go next.
Unfortunately, Ben, you may have to spell your name too. We may be here till 7 o'clock.
Thankfully, it's in my image, so that's what I was going to defer to. I'm not going to spell it out. It's very long. So as far as phone numbers are concerned, the direct line would be just 561-581-8800. And we have several professionals over here that strictly focus and are dedicated to condominium and HOA associations that could absolutely assist. My email address, it is B and then my last name at epicforensics with an S at the end.com.
So it's B Messerschmidt at epicforensics.com.
Yes.
Okay. And Bruce, go ahead.
Tim, I'll let you do us. How's that? How about you tell them where they can get in touch with us?
Well, you can reach out to me at tokeefe@kwpmc.com. You can call me at 954-815-8321. That's actually my cell phone, so you can reach me there. So gentlemen, I don't want to stop because this has been just an absolutely fantastic conversation today. For everybody listening today, we had very few people drop off. We had over about 130 people join today, so we appreciate your time. We will send out this broadcast to everybody that signed up, and everyone that signed up that didn't show up, they'll get it please encourage everyone to listen to it, share it with your fellow board members. I think there'll be a lot that comes from this. If I can get Ben and David to come back next month, we'll do this again, because I think there's more learning that we certainly can do. And there's going to be a lot that we learn over the next month based on what's found at Champlain Tower South. And David certainly has his hand on the pulse of what's going on in the state and what the governor is going to be doing and county is going to be doing. So thank you all so much. Again, David Haber from Haber Law. Thanks, David. Ben Messerschmidt from Epic Forensics and Engineering, and Bruce Masia from our own KW Property Management Consulting. Gentlemen, you could have done a better job. Thank you so much. Look forward to having everyone join us again next month for best practices for community associations, the third Wednesday of the month from 3 to 4 o'clock. From all of us at KW Property Management Consulting, be respectful to your neighbors, stay healthy, and have a great month. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.